That Saturday afternoon was supposed to be perfect. The backyard shimmered with color, balloons tied to every chair, streamers strung between the trees, a picnic table sagging under the weight of gifts wrapped in shiny paper. The grill sizzled in the corner where Brian, my husband, laughed with his uncle over a stack of burgers. Parents mingled with lemonade in plastic cups, while kids darted across the lawn, faces flushed with excitement. And right in the center of it all sat the cake, 3 tiers tall, frosted in sky blue swirls, topped with tiny sugar rockets blasting upward, as if Ethan's dreams could take flight right there on buttercream wings. My son had begged for a space-themed cake for weeks, and I had made sure this one was exactly what he wanted. It wasn't cheap, not with student loans still breathing down our necks, but for me it was worth every overtime shift. I stood by the table, smoothing the skirt of my dress, listening to Ethan's laughter as he chased bubbles across the grass. This was his day. For a moment, I let myself relax, soaking in the warm breeze, the smell of frosting and barbecue mingling in the air. I had imagined this scene so many times. Our family gathered, candles glowing, everyone singing as I leaned down to cut the first slice for my boy. A small tradition, but one I'd clung to through all the noise of our complicated family dynamics. I reached for the knife, my hand steady, a smile spreading across my face. And then, slicing through the cheer like the crack of ice breaking, her voice landed. "Don't touch the cake," my mother-in-law said at my son's birthday party. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Her words slid into the air sharp as glass, pitched just right so the adults around the table would hear. Not shouted, not whispered, just perfectly measured to sound like instruction, but feel like a slap. My fingers froze inches above the knife. The smile stayed on my lips, but my stomach lurched. Around me, chatter dimmed for a heartbeat. My sister-in-law pretended to check her phone. One dad cleared his throat. No one said a word. I lowered my hand slowly as if it suddenly weighed 50 pounds, and set the plate back down on the table. My cheeks burned, but outwardly I remained calm, even pleasant. I picked up a napkin, dabbed at my lips, a little performance to mask the sting. Inside, though, I felt the floor shift. She had just told me, in front of everyone, that I wasn't allowed to cut my own child's birthday cake. It wasn't the first time she had done something like this. But standing there with the sun shining, balloons bobbing, and Ethan waiting nearby, it was the first time I felt the weight of it settle like a stone in my chest. My son ran over, sneakers slapping against the grass. His face was glowing with sweat and joy, his little astronaut t-shirt clinging to his back. "Mom, are we cutting the cake yet? Can you do it?" he asked eagerly. Those words, "Can you do it?" they pierced right through me. His simple trust, his assumption that of course his mom would be the one to give him the first slice, lit a spark I hadn't felt before. I bent down, brushing a strand of hair off his forehead, my smile softening. "Of course, sweetie," I said. My voice was calm, steady, but my heart was hammering. I reached again for the knife. My mother-in-law's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin line. I could feel the tension radiating off her like heat. She wanted to stop me, I knew. But Ethan was right there watching, and so was everyone else. The table hushed as I lifted the knife. The sunlight glinted on the blade. Balloons swayed in the breeze like they were holding their breath. Even the laughter in the yard dimmed, replaced by that peculiar quiet that creeps in when something unscripted is about to unfold. "Make a wish, sweetheart," I whispered to Ethan, loud enough for the circle around us to hear. He squeezed his eyes shut, cheeks puffing as he blew out the candles with all the force an 8-year-old could muster. Cheers erupted, the sound swelling like a tide. Parents clapped, kids shouted, and in that swell of joy, the awkwardness cracked open. I cut the first slice. The knife slid cleanly through the frosting, steady in my grip now. I placed the piece onto a plate and handed it directly to Ethan. He beamed, taking it with both hands, and dove in, smearing blue frosting across his grin. Applause rose again. Cameras clicked. Someone shouted, "Happy birthday, buddy!" The moment was his, pure and bright. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw her. My mother-in-law stood rigid, her hands clenched around her purse strap. Her lips were tight, almost white, and her eyes darted from me to the cake to Ethan, as if she were searching for a way to spin what had just happened. But she had none. The crowd was already moving on, focused on Ethan's joy, on the party, on everything except her. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My action had said everything. I was his mother, and this was our moment. Still, inside me, my thoughts spiraled. This wasn't just about cake. This was about years of being cut down in small ways. Last Christmas, when she'd accidentally given Ethan's gift to his cousin. Easter, when she'd announced to a full table that I never really cook. Each slight had been brushed off as harmless, just a joke, just a mistake. And every time, I had smiled, nodded, swallowed the hurt to keep the peace. But not today. Today, the line had been crossed, and Ethan himself had handed me the courage I needed. The music picked up again. Kids tore into gift bags. Brian called for another round of burgers. On the surface, the party went back to normal. But in the marrow of the day, something had shifted. I wasn't the same woman who always let her words land without a response. I had chosen to act, quietly but firmly, to let everyone see, without a scene, where my place truly was. I glanced once more at my mother-in-law. She avoided my eyes, fussing with her phone. Maybe she thought she could dismiss it, pretend it hadn't happened. But deep down, I wondered if she realized what she had just lost. Because in that moment, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of her anymore. Looking back, that clean slice through blue frosting didn't appear out of thin air. It was the endpoint of a week of small choices, tiny rehearsals, and a voice in my gut that kept insisting something was off. It started with the text from my mother-in-law the previous Sunday. Quick plan for Ethan's party. We'll host at our place. You just bring Ethan and a smile. On the surface, it was generous, almost sweet, the kind of offer that makes other parents at school say you're lucky to have such involved grandparents. But I reread the message 3 times and felt that familiar pressure on my ribs, as if a seatbelt were cinching tighter, notch by notch. The planning thread grew over the next few days, and her favorite pronoun revealed itself in every line. We booked, we decided, we agreed, until my name disappeared between the commas. She picked the theme, the playlist, the balloon colors, even the time Ethan would blow out candles, which she called the big moment. I offered to order the cake and got a brisk reply. Already handled, she wrote, and added a thumbs up. That should have been fine, but the bakery screenshot she attached showed a message to the decorator that made my stomach clench. Classic white, no garish sprinkles, keep it elegant. Ethan had wanted tiny rockets and silver stars because, in his words, space looks like confetti that learned manners. I stared at the screen until the lights on the microwave blinked from 5:59 to 6, then typed that the rockets mattered to him, and could we please add them? She responded with a smiley and the words "we'll see," which I had learned meant the same as no. On Tuesday evening, after I clocked out from a 10-hour shift, I drove to a big box store for paper plates, napkins, and a banner, just in case there wasn't one. The aisle smelled like vanilla candles and plastic, and under those fluorescent lights, I practiced being gracious, the way you practice a smile before a school picture. I told myself it was only a few hours, one backyard, one cake, one tradition I could hold on to if I stayed steady. On Wednesday, Brian came home late and dropped his keys in the bowl with a clatter, the sound that always tells me he is bracing for a conversation he doesn't want to have. He kissed my forehead, asked about Ethan's school project, and then said his mom mentioned I seemed stressed and maybe she should handle the more delicate parts. Delicate, in her dictionary, meant anything visible, anything that would be captured in photos and posted for the extended family. I asked Brian if he thought I was overreacting, and he did that careful shrug men do when each road in the conversation looks like a trap. He said it would be easier to let his mom feel useful, that it was only a few hours, and we could celebrate again at home later with our own slice of peace. I wanted to argue, but I was tired, and a tired woman will trade a fight for sleep the way a thirsty plant trades flowers for roots. On Thursday afternoon, the seating chart arrived as a photo, a hand-drawn sketch on a yellow legal pad. Kids along one side, parents on the other, and a smaller table near the back listed as overflow. Brian's name was on the main table beside his uncle, my mother-in-law at the head, and an empty square where my name should have been. I texted to ask if there had been a mistake, and she replied that she put me on the small table to be closer to the gift station so I could keep an eye on wrapping paper and tape. I read it 3 times, not sure whether to laugh or cry, And then I wrote back a single word: noted. That night I ironed Ethan's shirt, lined up candles by the sink, and taped a tiny rocket sticker to the lighter. A small promise to myself that the day would still belong to him. Friday brought errands and weather that swung from sunny to humid to the kind of sticky air that makes your ponytail feel like a scarf. I picked up extra ice, packed serving spoons, and tucked napkins into a tote. The practical armor of someone who knows that preparedness is the only way to keep your dignity when plans tilt. That night, I barely slept. The house too quiet. The digital clock carving red numbers into the dark, while my mind played a slideshow of past comments that had felt harmless until they were not. She once joked at Thanksgiving that I was great with spreadsheets and not much else, and everyone laughed because jokes are the spoonful of sugar that help the insult go down. Another time, when Ethan was sick and I stayed up all night with a thermometer and a glass of water, she arrived the next morning with soup and announced that some mothers just have a knack that others don't. Each comment was small enough to ignore in the moment, but together they stacked like plates after a potluck, heavy and precarious, waiting for the slightest nudge to crash. Saturday morning arrived dressed in blue sky and possibility. I loaded the car with the tote, a cooler, and 2 folding chairs because I had learned never to assume there would be a seat with my name on it. Ethan bounced in the passenger seat, quizzing me on planet facts, and I matched his enthusiasm, answering that Jupiter had storms bigger than Texas and Saturn wore rings like a hula hoop for giants. When we pulled into the driveway at his grandmother's house, the front yard was already staged like a photo backdrop, the welcome sign lettered neatly, the balloons perfectly spaced as if measured with a ruler. Inside, the kitchen counters gleamed, and the playlist drifted through the rooms at just the right volume, cheerful but polite, the musical equivalent of a tight smile. She greeted us with air kisses and a comment about traffic that slid into a reminder to keep the wrappers tidy, because photographs love a clean background. That was the moment my gut spoke up for the last time, low and steady, telling me that if I wanted a memory that belonged to Ethan and to me, I would have to step into it when the time came. When I reached for the knife, I knew. If you looked at Margaret from the outside, you might think she was the picture of generosity. At church, she organized bake sales and always brought the prettiest pies. At the grocery store, she greeted half the town by name, her voice rich with warmth, her laughter the kind that made people turn and smile. Neighbors adored her. Friends described her as dependable, even saintly. And in truth, I once admired her too. When I first met Daniel, she welcomed me with a smile that seemed genuine, and I thought, how lucky to marry into a family with a woman like her at its center. But the shine wore off quickly. The first time I felt the sting was at our wedding rehearsal dinner. Margaret raised her glass for a toast, her voice ringing clear over the chatter. She praised Daniel for being ambitious, for carrying the family legacy with dignity, for being the kind of man anyone would be proud to call son. Then her eyes flicked to me, and she added, "And Emily, I suppose we'll find out soon enough if you can keep up with him." Laughter rippled around the room, though I couldn't tell if it was nervous or genuine. I forced a smile, cheeks burning, telling myself it was just a joke. But in her gaze, sharp as a pin, I knew it was meant to land. Months later, when Ethan was born, I naively thought things might change. Margaret came to the hospital, carrying flowers so large they dwarfed the tiny space. She kissed Daniel on the cheek, patted his back, and told him he'd done well. Then she turned to me and said, "You look exhausted, dear. You should let me take the baby tonight so you can rest. Some mothers just aren't natural at this, and that's perfectly fine." My arms tightened around my newborn instinctively. I told her no, gently but firmly. Her lips pressed into a smile, but her eyes said something different. Resistance was unwise. There were endless small cuts after that. Easter dinner, when she announced to the entire table that I burned the ham so badly Daniel had to save the meal, though in reality she'd insisted on taking over the oven and misread the timer. Thanksgiving, when she said, "Emily, why don't you sit down? You must be tired. I'll handle dessert," only to serve a pie she'd secretly baked herself, brushing off the pumpkin pie I had carefully made as store-bought, no doubt. Even birthdays before this one carried her fingerprints. She once swapped out the decorations I'd chosen, replacing them with what she called something more tasteful, as if an 8-year-old's favorite cartoon was somehow offensive to her sensibilities. The hardest moments weren't the ones that embarrassed me. They were the ones that confused Ethan. He was only a child, and children believe what they hear. When Margaret told him, "Grandma always makes the best cookies, doesn't she?" He nodded happily, not realizing he was feeding into her quiet campaign. When she accidentally gave his Christmas present to his cousin, she laughed and said, "Oh dear, I suppose Santa mixed up the names." Ethan frowned, but shrugged it off, too young to notice the sting in her smile when she glanced at me across the room. Daniel, for his part, didn't always see it. Or maybe he didn't want to. He grew up in the eye of Margaret's storm, conditioned to see her commands as care, her criticisms as quirks. When I tried to explain how her words landed, he would sigh and say, "That's just how Mom is. She doesn't mean anything by it." And for years, I swallowed it. I told myself it wasn't worth starting wars over cakes and pies and table settings. But each dismissal cut a little deeper. Each slight planted a seed that grew into quiet doubt. Was I really not good enough? Did I imagine the malice in her tone? Was I just overly sensitive? One night, after a particularly tense Sunday dinner, I remember standing at the sink, washing dishes while Daniel dried. Margaret had corrected me 3 times in front of his cousins. Once about how I folded napkins, once about how much salt I used in the potatoes, and once about how I had mispronounced the name of a distant relative. I held my tongue through it all, smiling tightly, nodding as if the corrections were helpful. But in the quiet of our kitchen later, with only the hum of the refrigerator as witness, I broke. "Do you really not see it?" I asked Daniel, my voice raw. He frowned, towel in hand. "See what?" "How she talks to me, how she treats me. Like I'm just renting space in your life until she decides otherwise." Daniel leaned against the counter, rubbing the back of his neck. She's old-fashioned. She likes things her way. It doesn't mean she doesn't love you." Love. That word had become heavy, almost meaningless in Margaret's mouth. Her version of love looked like control. It looked like public corrections, backhanded compliments, and stolen moments. And it always came wrapped in a smile broad enough that outsiders thought she was a saint. Over the years, I tried every tactic. Polite acceptance, hoping she would tire of the game. Active involvement, volunteering to host or help in ways that might earn her approval. Even distance, limiting contact in hopes space would soften her grip. But nothing worked. If I stepped forward, she pushed me down. If I stepped back, she filled the space so completely there was no oxygen left for me to breathe. And yet, through it all, I stayed quiet. For Daniel. For Ethan. For the fragile illusion of family harmony. I told myself silence was strength, that holding my tongue was the noble choice. But deep down, I knew it wasn't strength. It was survival. By the time this birthday rolled around, I thought I had prepared myself. I told myself I could weather whatever she threw at me. I rehearsed gracious responses in the mirror, the kind that would deflect without escalating. I packed extra napkins, just in case she criticized the mess. I even reminded myself that the day was about Ethan, not me. But when she said, "Don't touch the cake," in front of everyone, it wasn't just another jab. It was the culmination of years of small humiliations, layered on top of one another until they formed a tower ready to topple. It wasn't about a knife or a slice of cake or even a birthday. It was about identity, about being seen as Ethan's mother, not just a placeholder until Margaret decided otherwise. And for once, instead of shrinking, I stood. Because as much as Margaret had shaped the stage, she wasn't the star of this story. Ethan was, and I was his mother. That truth, undeniable and simple, gave me a strength I didn't realize I had until the moment I needed it most. So when I think back to the laughter that faltered, the parents who glanced away, the silence that hung after her words, I realize it wasn't just me who saw it. Everyone did. And when I cut that cake, I wasn't just giving Ethan his first slice. I was taking back my place, one deliberate motion at a time. That's the thing about control. It only works as long as the other person consents to stay small. The moment you refuse, the moment you decide your silence is over, the spell breaks. And on that sunny Saturday, with frosting on Ethan's cheeks and cheers rising around us, Margaret's spell finally broke. The moment Daniel sided with me, the air shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet kind of shift, the way a room changes when someone finally opens a window after hours of stifling heat. Guests who had been watching from the corners of their eyes exchanged subtle glances. A few parents leaned closer to their kids, whispering them back into play, pretending nothing was happening. But I knew. Everyone knew. Margaret stood frozen, her posture stiff, her carefully composed smile trembling at the edges. For decades, she had choreographed every family gathering like a director on stage, and the cast had always followed her cues. But in that instant, she lost control of the script. "Daniel," she said at last, her voice brittle, "I can't believe you'd humiliate me like this. After all I've done for you." The words stung like tiny needles in the air. They weren't just meant for Daniel. They were meant for me, a reminder of the hierarchy she believed in, a reminder that she had given him life, and in her eyes, that meant she owned every decision in his. But Daniel didn't flinch. He stood straighter, his hand brushing lightly against my arm as if to anchor me. "Mom," he said, his voice low but steady, "this isn't about you. It's about Ethan. And Emily is his mother. That's where this ends." Margaret's eyes flicked to me, sharp and unforgiving. "You've poisoned him against me," she hissed. "You've turned my own son into a stranger." I inhaled slowly, choosing my words with care. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out clear. "I didn't turn him against you, Margaret. I just stopped letting you turn him against me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't venom. Just truth laid bare, truth that had been simmering for years, finally spoken aloud. For a moment, I saw something flash across her face. Shock, maybe even fear. But just as quickly, the mask returned. She straightened her shoulders, adjusted the strap of her purse, and smiled tightly at the watching guests. "Well," she said crisply, "if that's how things are going to be, then so be it." She turned as if to leave, but Daniel's voice stopped her. "Mom," he said firmly, "you're welcome here. Always. But not if it means belittling Emily. That's not happening anymore." The statement landed like a gavel. Final. Irrevocable. Margaret froze mid-step, her back still to us. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable, until finally she exhaled, long and slow. When she turned back, her smile was still in place, but her eyes gave her away. There was no triumph there. Only the raw sting of someone who had just lost ground they thought was theirs forever. She glanced at Ethan, who was holding my hand, his plate balanced precariously in the other. His little face was smeared with frosting, his eyes wide but unafraid. She bent slightly, forcing a cheerful tone. "Grandma loves you very much, darling," she said. "Never forget that." Ethan looked up at me, then back at her. His small, steady voice cut through the tension. "I know, but I wanted Mom to cut the cake." The simplicity of it was devastating. No politics, no power struggle, just a child stating what he wanted, as clear as daylight. Margaret blinked, her composure slipping for just a fraction of a second. Then she nodded, turned on her heel, and walked toward the house. The door clicked shut behind her, and just like that, the backyard seemed to breathe again. Guests began to murmur, conversations picking up like a record needle settling back into its groove. Kids laughed, chasing each other with balloon strings. Parents exhaled in relief, pretending to be absorbed in their plates, though I caught more than a few curious glances my way. Daniel squeezed my hand. His eyes were tired, conflicted, but for once, he didn't look away. "You did the right thing," he whispered. I searched his face, wanting to believe him, needing to. "Did I? Or did I just start a war?" He shook his head. "It's not a war. It's the truth, and it's about time." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I crouched down to wipe Ethan's chin, kissed the top of his messy hair, and listened to his giggle bubble up. That sound, that pure, unfiltered joy, was why I had stood my ground. Not for pride, not for revenge. For him, for the memory of this day that would carry him forward. Later, when the sun dipped low and the guests began to leave, I noticed the empty chair at the head of the table where Margaret usually sat. It struck me that her absence didn't collapse the gathering as she might have imagined. People still laughed, plates still clinked. The world went on, perhaps even lighter without her constant control. As I gathered wrapping paper and stacked empty cups, I realized something powerful. Margaret could control the narrative only as long as I let her. But the second I claimed my space, my voice, my role, she no longer held that power. The storm wasn't over. I knew that. Margaret wasn't a woman to surrender easily. There would be whispers, new battles, subtle digs in the weeks to come. But tonight, as Ethan drifted to sleep in the back seat, clutching a toy rocket in his small hand, I felt a shift inside me too. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for the next strike. I wasn't shrinking into the background. I was standing tall, exactly where I belonged. And whether Margaret admitted it or not, everyone at that party had seen it. They had seen the moment her authority cracked. They had seen who cut the cake. And so had I. The house was quieter after everyone left, the kind of quiet that only follows a day packed with noise and laughter. Wrapping paper was stuffed into trash bags, balloons sagged in the corners, and paper plates sat stacked high on the counter. Daniel rinsed dishes in the sink while I moved through the living room, gathering stray juice boxes and toy cars. It should have been ordinary cleanup, but underneath the motions lingered a new tension, something heavy like a storm cloud that hadn't quite drifted away. Ethan was curled up on the couch, half asleep, his toy rocket clutched tight in his hands. His cheeks were still sticky with frosting, his hair sticking up in wild tufts, and yet his breathing was steady, peaceful. I pulled a blanket over him, pressing a kiss to his forehead, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had given him a gift that went beyond presents or cake. I had given him proof that his mother could stand tall, that her place in his life was not negotiable. Daniel dried his hands and leaned against the doorway, watching me. His face carried a mix of pride and unease, as if he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how to begin. "Emily," he started slowly, "I know today was hard, but I think maybe it was necessary." I turned to face him, arms crossed lightly over my chest. "Necessary, yes, but do you realize what comes next? Margaret won't just let this go. You know her." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I do, but maybe she needed to hear it. Maybe I needed to hear it too." The honesty in his voice softened something inside me. For so long, I had felt like I was shouting into silence, my words bouncing off walls he couldn't or wouldn't see past. But tonight, for once, I wasn't alone in carrying the weight of it. Still, I knew the battle was only beginning. Margaret's exit from the party wasn't surrender. It was retreat. And a retreat meant regrouping, planning, waiting for another chance to reassert control. I could almost picture her now, sitting in her polished living room, already rehearsing the story she'd tell others. How she had been humiliated by an ungrateful daughter-in-law. How she had been disrespected after years of sacrifice. The thought made my stomach twist, but I straightened my shoulders. I couldn't control her narrative any more than I could control the weather. What I could control was my own. Later that night, after Ethan was tucked into bed, Daniel and I sat in the dim glow of the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence until finally, he spoke again. "You were right," he said. His voice was low, almost hesitant. "About how she treats you. I didn't want to see it before. It was easier not to. But today, I couldn't ignore it." The admission hit me harder than I expected. For years, I had begged for that acknowledgement, fought for it in small, careful ways. And now, hearing it out loud, my eyes stung. "Daniel," I whispered, "I never wanted you to choose between us. I just wanted you to see me, to see what she was doing." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "I see you now." Those 4 words didn't erase the past, but they built a bridge I thought might never exist. The following week proved my instincts right. Margaret called only once, her voice clipped and formal, asking how Ethan was. She didn't mention the party. She didn't mention the cake. But her silence said more than words ever could. It was the silence of someone nursing a wound, plotting the next move. Yet something had shifted permanently. I wasn't waiting in fear anymore. I wasn't rehearsing excuses or scrambling to keep the peace. I was steady, grounded, ready. And the truth was, Margaret could twist the story however she wanted. She could tell neighbors, cousins, anyone who would listen. But the people who mattered, Daniel, Ethan, and even those who had stood awkwardly in our backyard, had seen the truth with their own eyes. They had seen Margaret's control fracture, and they had seen me refuse to bend. One evening, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at me with sleepy eyes and said, "Mom, can you always cut my cake?" I smiled, brushing his hair back from his forehead. Always, I promised. That simple request, that simple trust, was worth more than any approval Margaret could ever withhold. The storm wasn't over, but I no longer feared it, because storms pass, and when they do, the ones who remain standing are stronger for having faced them. And I knew this much. The next time Margaret tried to test me, I wouldn't be silent. I had found my voice, and I wasn't giving it back. The days after Ethan's birthday passed in a way that felt almost unreal. The house was the same, the schedule the same, yet everything carried a different weight. For the first time in years, I could sit at our kitchen table without bracing myself for the next criticism, the next sudden visit, the next storm disguised as concern. There was still laundry to fold, bills to pay, and toys scattered across the floor, but beneath it all was something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Margaret's silence lingered like a ghost. She didn't call to offer her opinions on Ethan's clothes. She didn't stop by uninvited. She didn't comment on how I managed the house. And at first, I didn't quite trust it. I kept listening for the familiar sound of her car in the driveway, expecting her sharp knock on the door. But as days turned into weeks, I realized how much of my life had been spent waiting for her entrance, for her judgment, for the next blow. Without her constant shadow, I could breathe. Ethan could breathe. One evening, as I tucked him into bed, he whispered, "Mom, it feels better when it's just us." His little voice, so honest and unguarded, nearly broke me. He had seen, he had felt, he had carried pieces of the tension that I thought I was shielding him from. Children always notice more than we believe. Daniel noticed too. Sometimes I caught him staring at me across the dinner table. His expression softened with something between regret and admiration. One night he said quietly, "I thought silence was keeping the peace, but now I see it was costing us too much." For the first time in our marriage, I felt truly seen. Still, I knew Margaret hadn't disappeared. Her silence was not surrender, but retreat. One day, she would return. She would test the new boundaries. But this time, I wasn't afraid. The difference was clear. I had claimed my place, not by shouting, but by standing firm. And once you've claimed your place, no one can take it from you. Looking back, I know now it was never about the cake. It was about years of control dressed up as family loyalty. It was about me being erased in small, subtle ways until I questioned my own worth. That day in the backyard with everyone watching wasn't just about who cut the cake. It was about who had the right to belong. And I belonged. The lesson I carry is simple. Love without respect isn't love, it's control. Boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary. They don't lock people out, but they draw the lines so relationships can exist without destroying the people inside them. Ethan deserves to grow up knowing love that respects him. And I deserve to live in a home where I am seen, not diminished. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to remember, it's this. You don't need permission to claim your place. You don't need to wait for someone else to validate you. Sometimes courage doesn't come in grand speeches or bold confrontations. Sometimes it comes in quiet moments, in choosing not to step aside, in saying enough when no one else dares to. For me, that courage came with a birthday cake. For you, it might be something else, a dinner table conversation, a family gathering, a moment when someone tries to push you out of the picture. Whatever it looks like, I hope you'll remember this. Your voice matters, your place matters, and the story doesn't move forward without you. Ethan will remember that his mom cut the cake, and that memory will mean more than any approval Margaret could ever give. So as I close this chapter, I want to speak directly to you. If my story touched you, if it echoed something in your own life, I hope you'll take a moment to share your thoughts with me. Leave a comment below. I would love to hear your stories, your struggles, your victories. If you know someone who needs to hear this reminder, please share this video with them. It may be the encouragement they've been waiting for. And if you want to walk with me through more stories like this, stories about strength, about family, about finding your voice, please, from my heart, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Your support doesn't just help this channel grow. It creates a community where no one has to feel invisible again. So please, like, share, comment, and subscribe. Stay with me here. Together, we can make sure every voice finds its place and no one gets pushed aside.